Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Mr. Jerry Kolber. So without further ado, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, the pleasure is always mine. I'm excited for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about STEAM and introducing our folks of color, our students of color, specifically into the STEAM fields. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is I've made a lot of television that's kind of educational entertainment, like Brain Games for Nat Geo and Brainchild for Netflix. Currently, I am the co-creator and host of a podcast called Who Smarted that comes out 3 times a week. Every episode is all about some sort of topic from science, history, engineering, culture, done in a scripted and fun way to get kids excited about learning.
You are busy, man. I don't know how in the world you are publishing 3 episodes. I struggle getting 1 in a week. You're getting 3 in. Good job on that.
I mean, it's my job. So, that's like me saying, how do you manage to do all your work?
Okay, it's fair enough. Yeah.
Thank you.
Even when, so I'm a school principal now, but even before I remember there was a time when I first started, I was doing 2 a week, but even that was a lot. So, I mean, you're scripting your thing and, there's a whole production side. So good kudos to you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. I will say when we started this during the pandemic, it was kind of a side project to help kids get off the screen and, all that. And I don't know why we picked 3 times a week. I guess because we didn't really have anything else to do because we were all at home,
Yeah.
And then when the show caught on and then the pandemic stopped and we got back to work, we're like, wow, it's a lot of episodes to do every week, but we have figured it out.
Good. All right. Well, let's get into it because, like you mentioned, you've done a lot of work out there. You've worked with National Geographic. You've worked with Netflix. You've done some other things. You have your own show, obviously. There's a lot of things that you're doing. But you and I were talking before we hit record about your enthusiasm or the work that you're doing in the STEM fields and some of your passion in regards to introducing more folks of color into that field. I want to start with what led you to that idea or that concept.
Yeah, so that really came up when we were doing Brain Games initially for National Geographic about 12 or 13 years ago. In Nat Geo, like pretty much every science channel, most of their experts tended to be white male scientists, right? And so as we were doing Brain Game, which was a show that was supposed to appeal to everybody in society and help them understand how their brain worked, we started noticing the same trend that the scientists that were getting sent to us and approved were mostly white guys. And we started to notice it. And then a couple of the women, especially there's some women of color who worked with us on the show, and they're like, hey, are there any like black or lady scientists in the world? Because it doesn't feel like it. We're starting to feel that too. So we then just made an effort to really, shift the needle on that show and provide visibility. What really made us feel like we were on the right path was we started to get letters from young kids, in junior high and high school, saying that they'd now seen someone who'd inspired them. It confirmed this idea that visibility equals entry points for kids. If you don't see yourself or someone who looks like you, it's hard to imagine yourself on that path. It just became kind of part of the vocabulary of how we think about shows from that point forward.
Well, first of all, thank you for noticing and utilizing the position that you're in order to make some changes there. So once you started to notice things, what was some of the things that you ended up doing as a result?
If you look at later seasons of Brain Games, almost all of the scientists are either women or people of color or both. So, to the point where it was maybe like overcorrected.
That was the other direction, right?
You know what? Someone said that to me and I was like, yeah, okay. So sure. Our one show is making up for 30 years of I think we're fine. But so we just started making an effort there. But that was, I would say in some ways, I wouldn't call it superficial, but that was more, it was more like adding into something that existed. It wasn't until we did the next project that we actually were able to really think about that visibility and bake it into the project rather than add it in. And so we were able to actually design the next show. It was like impossible to separate out the idea of visibility for people of color and STEM from the show itself.
So here's the thing, and I love this because as I'm thinking about it, it's one thing to say, okay, well, we recognize that we had it was basically white men that were representing our show. So then we switched over and then now it's nothing but folks of color or women as well, that balance. And I think sometimes what happens is people have really good intentions of trying to, embed diversity when it comes to representation. But sometimes the folks of color or sometimes the women are viewed as contributors, not necessarily as a baked in fabric of the STEM field. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like your next project kind of was, you got your legs going and you kind of figured out how to navigate things going further. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we were able look, and I got to tell you, like, this isn't, I'm not saying this to make myself look like I did something amazing here, because I'll explain to you why we were able to do it. This is a very hard thing to pull off in television. There's a lot of implicit and sometimes explicit bias in television. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm telling you anything that you'd be surprised to hear, because I mean, I know you don't watch a lot of TV, but if you did, you would notice this. So this next project we did, we actually met Pharrell Williams and his creative partner, Mimi Valdez, because they loved Brain Games, that prior show I was talking about. And Pharrell was interested. He's always been interested in education and science. And he wanted to do a show for kids specifically that would get them excited about science and things like motivation and how the world works. And he really was very adamant that the show itself had to be really, really appealing to children of color and to young women, because he knew that those were underrepresented populations. Not as like, hey, let's throw a few kids in the cast, but like, how do you make a show like from the ground up, design it that way? And so Brainchild was that show, and there was no way to pull that thread out of the show. Like the host was a young woman of color. The only science expert on the show is this amazing woman, Allie Ward. All of the volunteers that we have in the experiments are like representational of the actual makeup of society, rather than just like, hey, we had like a black family in one of the episodes. So it just was baked into the idea of the show. And it's like, when I look at that show, I'm like, man, I wish more shows did this, because it's done in a way that you feel like you're in the world while you're watching the show. It doesn't feel added on or tacked on, or like someone was like checking a box. So it just feels organic. And the reaction we had from kids, all white kids, black kids, Latino kids, everybody told us that we were on the right path, because kids just felt like they were seeing their actual world represented on screen.
So when you say the folks are, so were they reaching out like via letters, internet? Like how were you getting that data?
Yeah, we get letters from kids. We have like people would come on our website and send us notes. So yeah, so it was the feedback was very clear.
Okay, and so again, thank you for this. I'm curious, how did you get connected with Pharrell Williams?
Oh, we just hang out now. Like
that was a homie, right?
So Pharrell was actually represented at the same agency we were at the time. Okay. And he'd mentioned to his agent that he wanted to do something like in the world of science. And he said, I love this show, Brain Games. Mm-hmm. Like, they seem like they know what they're doing. They seem like they're on the same, like the thinking level that I'm on. And the agent was like, this guy, Jad, who's a friend. And our agent was like, I know those guys. And so there was a day where Jad's like, oh, can you guys go to this hotel? Pharrell's in New York. He's in room whatever, someone's going to meet in the lobby and go up with you. And we got to the hotel, and the person who was supposed to meet us was late and texted us and was like, oh, you can just go up. So like, now we just like go up and knock on the door, and like Pharrell opens the door, and we're like, oh my God, like I'm such a fan. And he's like, no, I'm such a fan of you guys. You guys are doing amazing. Like, it was just this like immediate like humility from both sides. And we ended up talking for so long that first time about all these ideas that like his team was eventually like, look, he's got to go. Like, he's late for his next thing. And so then that just it just became obvious from that first meeting that, we were going to have a really, really good time making something really powerful together.
All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. I was just curious.
Yeah, you need to know. You needed to know. Now you know. Agents, man. It's agents. It's all agents.
But if you were like, yeah, that was my best friend, we grew up if you had that story, I would have been intrigued as well. So
that would have also been a good story, but no, it was all through the agents. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So the show is called Brainchild. Yeah. Now, is this multiple seasons? Where are we at right now when it comes to the availability on Netflix?
Yeah. So Brainchild was one season, 13 episodes. It is still on Netflix. It still continues to perform very well for them. The other interesting thing with that show is both Pharrell and ourselves wanted to create curriculum to make it easy to use that show in classrooms, whether it was a classroom teaching motivation topics or language literacy or science stuff. And so we hired a STEM team that created this awesome curriculum that can work for middle school or upper grades. And that's still available. It's totally free for any teachers that want it. It's at brainchildshow.com and still gets downloaded all the time.
All right. So that was you see, it's like you were thinking ahead, like you already knew what the kind of questions I was going to ask you, because I was going to ask, like, is this a curriculum based type of show that science folks or STEM folks could bring into the classrooms? So it's middle and high school levels is the age?
No, sorry. It's like elementary and middle school.
Yeah. Okay.
So 3 to 5 and then 6 to 8.
And so like a teacher that's working in science, technology, engineering, mathematics could essentially watch the videos or play the videos for their students. And then there's a lesson behind it, some assessment, things like that.
Yes. We made it super easy for the teachers to use the show because there's some great content there. The curriculum, it has like the lesson plans, it's got activities, got take home stuff, exit questions, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads to the next part that I wanted to kind of touch on in regards to STEM is the accessibility side of things. We assume that everyone has a Netflix account and that they pay the subscription fees and all those things, or have a device to watch the content and things like that. So I kind of want to touch on maybe some of the accessibility challenges that you're seeing when it comes to the STEM field.
Yeah, I mean, they're huge. I mean, even if you, first of all, like, even if you have a Netflix account, you might not know this show exists.
Yeah.
Netflix swears their algorithm is like telepathic. I know this because I know so many families that loved Brain Games who have kids the age that would watch Brainchild who've never seen Brainchild pop up on their algorithm. So their algorithm is okay, but it's not amazing. And so if it doesn't tell you the show exists, you don't know about it.
Right.
But at the even higher level, like, there's just a lot of kids whose families can't afford Netflix, or they don't have Netflix for some other reason, or they don't have whatever the other streaming platform is. So on that level, accessibility can be an issue. And then on the other level, like, the network can decide at any time to take the show down, and now it's not there anymore. And we have seen that happen with shows that we've worked on that people were still watching. So that's a problem. And so how do we make shows and content that's going to be great for kids, no matter who they are, where they live, how much money their family makes, what their background is, that they can listen to anywhere, anytime, like literally as long as there's some sort of internet connection.
Yeah.
And the answer is exactly the same format you do, which is podcasting. It's free. It's everywhere. It's always available.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm a big fan of podcasting. Like, folks have asked me, how come you don't be why aren't you a blogger, things like that? And I said, man, the reach that you have when it comes to podcasting, the amount of individuals that I've met. I mean, I know I'm nowhere near as many episodes as you have, but I'm 365 ish.
That's a lot, man. That's pretty close to us. That's not far.
3 a week? You got to be at like 3,000, episode 3,000.
Well, no, we've been doing it for like 3 or 4 years. So we're like, I think we're at like 600. So you're definitely closer than anyone else I've ever spoken to. So man, you're busy.
Well, here's the thing. I'm a person of color, right? And so unfortunately, there's not a lot of education podcast hosts that are Black, let alone of color. And I've just been very fortunate enough to be always ranked within the top 100 or so in the how-to areas. Hence, this is how we got connected. Yeah. So there's a lot of accessibilities when it comes to representation of those who are hosting, those who are doing shows like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, we also realize, like, the second you start doing video or TV, whether it's you or television, you have to cast somebody to play that role visually. And the second you do that, you have created visibility for one group of people, and you've taken away a pathway to visibility for everybody else. We never really thought about that until we really started working with Mimi and Pharrell, because, obviously they're people of color. They think about this a lot. And so when we created this Who Smarted show, we were like, this is interesting because we can create a host for this show that's a scripted host that we never have to show what they look like. And so every single kid listening gets to decide what the host looks like, right? And so we've never created even a cartoon image or any kind of image of the host. And when we get drawings all the time from kids, like, that they've drawn the trusty narrator, it runs the gamut. Like some people think it's like a white guy. For some people, it's like a black woman. Like it runs like
Is that ambiguous?
That ambiguous. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I actually do the voice for it. Like I do this like character voice for it. And the voice definitely, like, I thought it was clearly me, but I have friends who are like, wait, I thought that was a woman doing the role. So I think people just hear what they want to hear on the voice. And so that's something that we think is a huge feature and benefit for the show, is that any kid listening can decide if they want to think the host looks like them, then the host looks like them. And so it's a way for them. They can imagine what they want and really connect that way.
I love that. So is this a STEM based show, or is it just education in general?
It's I would say education in general, leaning very strongly STEM. So we do a ton of episodes on science and engineering. We will sometimes do, history episodes. We do a lot of human body episodes. The kids sometimes will ask for like a pop culture episode. It'll be like, how did cereal get invented? Which turns into a STEM episode, obviously. But, we'll do like Roblox, we'll do whatever, we get tons of requests for stuff. So we tend to always kind of come back into the STEM zone though.
My understanding was cornflakes, for example, was an accidental discovery.
It was.
Did you hear about that? Okay.
Yeah. Health food.
Yeah. I remember they burnt something on accident. They got cornflakes and the rest is history. So
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So tell me a little bit more about the show. I mean, it's called Who's Smarted. Comes out 3 times a week. You would recommend. Now, is this something that has some curriculum behind it, or is it kind of like a fun fact, something that we can introduce into our classrooms?
Yeah, so we're actually working on curriculum, which will come out sometime later next year, but it gets used in classrooms mainly as part of like transition time or to introduce a topic. So it's, every episode is aligned in some way with some sort of science standard, but we haven't gone to the level yet of actually, outlining all of that and making it real easy. But we hear from teachers that they mainly use it after recess, coming back from lunch, settling kids in, or if they have a topic that's challenging that they know for kids, that kids can be challenged by, they'll find one of our episodes that relates to that topic, play it, and gets the kids, because it's all funny and fun the way we do it, and it just gets the kids excited and thinking and talking. So by the time you get to the curriculum, it goes down a lot easier.
All right. So first of all, folks, the links are going to be in the show notes. So make sure that you support the work that's being done here, because again, this is going to not only support a lot of folks that are interested in the STEM fields, but also it might introduce folks who have not thought about or considered the STEM fields as a possibility, especially when they're not considering seeing or hearing folks that they can relate to. I love, Jerry, how the narrator is so ambiguous that we're not even sure who it is. However, it gives the opportunity for imagination for those who are listening to kind of see themselves in that experience. What does that look like when you're kind of coming up with that idea?
So there's two parts of that answer.
Okay.
One is in terms of how we thought about writing the host. The idea was to make someone that kids would relate to, be excited to go on a journey with, someone who had some personality, who could literally travel anywhere in time or space. He has all kinds of devices. He can miniaturize, he can travel back in time, he can go into a black hole, whatever he needs to do, right? So he's this kind of interesting character. So that's how we thought of the character. In terms of the voice of the character, that was just because we were doing it during a pandemic and I had a microphone and I started doing it. And we thought this would be like for a few months, and then that kept going and the show kept growing. And at some point I was like, okay, so now it's time to cast someone else to do the voice. And everybody was like, no, everybody, everyone who works on the show, everyone who listens to the show, who knew that we were thinking about that. Our agents were like, no, you're it. And I was accidentally became the host of this show that now has just become huge, and it's fun. I love doing it, but it was not intended that I was going to host a giant long running kids podcast, but I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, I've been there. I started my show around the pandemic as well. And it was just I was just doing it just to help myself, selfishly. I was bringing on guests that I was just interested in topics. And then next thing I know, people started listening and they started reaching out and wanted me to come speak. And it just became a whole thing. And so I've always kept it going. So I personally can try to stay relevant and understand what the trends are, the topics. So this conversation here is helpful for me because sometimes I have these conversations with individuals who say, I'm looking for some STEM information. And I'll be like, you know what? I just spoke to Jerry. And this is a guy that you got to listen to, who's smarted. Like, these are things that I can kind of be a broker, if you will, in a lot of ways. So it just keeps me relevant.
Great. Yeah, makes sense. And I get the feeling, I've listened to some of your episodes. I think you'd like doing it.
Oh, yeah.
I think you like talking to people. Like,
one of the things I tell people, I was like, look, like folks will come up to me and, hey, I listen. And I say, you know what? One of the biggest pieces I think that I take away from these podcast episodes is like, you just hear the 30-minute snippet. That's the part that's recorded. However, I've spent 10, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes talking to this person behind the scenes, and we keep in touch. And so it's just the amount of individuals that I know at this point. It's just amazing. So I could imagine, Jerry, you've met all kind of scientists. You've had all these different experiences. You've learned all these fun facts that you probably wouldn't have learned on your own time.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah. By the way, I have to tell you, most podcasters are who been podcasting for a while are really good at interviews, which you're great at. Most people are not great at solo episodes, but you actually are. I listened to some of your solo ones.
I sometimes like, thank you. First of all, thank you.
Those are hard. You pull them off.
Don't be trying to blow me up now. I'm trying to stay humble. But
I'm just saying.
It's I've gotten very comfortable. I remember the very first time I was asked to speak. Just speak in general, like as an adult. And I remember I was an 8th grade teacher, and we had 8th grade graduations from, you finish middle school, you're going on to high school, and the 8th grade class, they asked me, can I do their keynote for their graduation? I remember being terrified. I had never done any kind of speaking, any of those kind of things. Believe this or not, I'm very introverted. So I was just like not trying to do it. I came back the next day because I told them no initially. Then I came back the next day and I was like, okay, all right, is the offer still there? Can I please do this? And they said yes. And so that was my first time. But I remember being on stage. I had literally scripted the entire speech out, and I was reading it word for word. And there's one part where it's like the graduating class. And so I asked the students, I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? So these are questions I had asked ahead of time. I had it written down into my speech, and I'm looking out and I'm like, hey, Michelle, you said you want to be a nurse. And I looked down at my paper and I got lost because after like the third person of looking up, trying to find that person, give them eye contact and say what they were wanting to be. And I went back down, and I just remember sitting there like, oh my gosh, I almost just walked away, but I just powered through that speech. And that was kind of like the spark for me that just kind of kept things going. So yeah, solos it's a lot easier now, but when I first started, oh my gosh, I had to have everything word for word.
Oh, yeah. No, it takes practice.
Yeah. What about you? Like, are you pretty? What are your thoughts on as far as doing solo episodes, or do you do any solo speaking engagement?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do speak now and then, and I can speak on everything from the educational podcast stuff, just podcasting in general. We don't everything I do on the podcast for Who Smarted is scripted. We have a couple of other shows that I'll go on and speak off the cuff, but Who Smarted is just totally we have great writers who write everything I say. So I could talk I feel like 8 to 10 minutes I can solo. After that, I'm like, man, I start to hear myself. Am I still going? Like, what am I talking about? It's a thing. Yeah.
I think that's the one thing for me is I really don't like to hear myself. Yeah. So like I'll do the edits and I'll do the episode, and sometimes I won't listen to it again just because I'm just constantly critiquing myself. Oh, he was rambling too much, and I should have I was rambling too much. I should have stopped at a certain point and these kind of things. And I just don't like to hear myself, but that's my own personal critique from time to time. So,
yeah. Okay. Well, I think you sound great. So
thank you.
We're all harder on ourselves than we would be on anyone else.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for listening to the show, because not everybody that I get guests have listened to the show. And then second of all, I appreciate the compliment, because you can understand and appreciate the amount of work that goes into producing a podcast. So thank you for that. I'll say this, Jerry, it's been fun meeting you and having these conversations. I want to kind of, before we move on and kind of wrap things up, I know you probably, based off of your experience, you might have some strategies when it comes to introducing accessibility, STEM, or even just based off of your experience when it comes to introducing students of color specifically and women into these fields. What kind of strategies could you provide that you've kind of learned over that time?
Honestly, the best thing you can do is find, whether it's media or have speakers you can bring in, but people who look like them, who are in real role, like leadership roles in engineering or science or technology, I don't think you can beat that. You can talk about it all day long, but when you bring in, a 35-year-old Black woman who's a leading researcher at a science organization to talk to the kids that are the younger version of her, there's just no better way to create that kind of visibility and pathway. I can't think of any better way to do it. Whether that's doing it live or, bringing in projects like, well, Mimi and Pharrell made that show, the movie Hidden Figures, anything like that, that's the way to do it. I just think it's the best way.
Yeah. But it requires us to be intentional about it. Like, this is something that we need to recognize. And if you're not thinking about it, because it's maybe not your lived experience, it's not something that you have to worry about because you're used to seeing your representation. But this takes someone that's very mindful about how things are looking when it comes to the STEM fields, where the trends are going, and what are some things that can enhance what's already happened. So again, you have to be intentional about it.
Do. Yeah. Well, and look, I'll say this is like, you maybe as an argument for being intentional about it when you have a million other things, clamoring for your time. I don't think we're going to solve. We have a lot of problems in our world. I'm not talking about politics, but like talking about just like resources and the weather, like whether you think stuff's man-made or not, we have issues we have to address, and we're not going to address them through changing everybody's behavior. Yeah. Right. We're going to actually end up fixing those things through technological and engineering solutions. Like, let's just jump through pretending that, everyone's going to start recycling and that's going to solve the problem. It's like, that's important to do, but the problem's going to be solved by smart kids of today who grow up and come up with technology and innovation. And so why wouldn't you want to activate every possible young mind that you could to start thinking that way? And when you look at the research that shows that Black children are 23% more likely to go to college if they have a Black teacher at some point in elementary school. Like, oh, okay, let's figure out, even we're not going to figure that out. Let's at least get some like role model to come talk to them and make sure they see that pathway, because otherwise you are just like literally leaving out a huge number of kids who are not going to get inspired to go in that direction, who could potentially have been the mind that was going to figure out how to solve some huge problem that we're all going to face. So I think, if it helps to think selfishly of these things rather than feeling like it's some kind of, checklist thing, that's one way to think about it. So
powerful words right there. And I didn't even know that statistic was there. So if they had just one teacher, you're more likely to go to college.
Yeah, I'll send you the research. I was just talking with someone else about it. It's pretty deep.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, listen, I've learned a lot. I'd love for you to take us home with any final words of advice you want to provide to our listeners out there.
I've had a great time talking. I think we talked about a lot of stuff. The last thing I would say is, like, anything you can do to keep all kids curious. If they're asking questions, don't tell them you're finding their questions annoying. If you don't know the answer, write it down, figure out a way to research with them later. I would just say anything you can do to not shut down kids who are being curious and inquisitive, even when it can be annoying sometimes, is good for them, and it's good for the world.
There it is. All right. Mic drop on that. Listen, Jerry, if we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
You can email me. Well, you can email us at whosmarted@whosmarted.com. That's great. You can go to our company site and hit contact. We see all that. That's atomicentertainment.com.
Okay. And your show is Who's Smartest? The podcast it's available, I'm assuming, on any platform that you can get your podcast from.
It is, and we actually have an ad-free version that usually costs money, but we make that free for all educators. They can use the version with no ads in their classroom, and that's at whosmarted.com. Click educators, and they get the ad-free version totally free.
Perfect. All right. Well, once again, I am speaking with Jerry Kolber. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. This is great.